November 1st here in Seoul, and I'm Kim Dami. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour, starting with an Israeli airstrike on a refugee camp in Gaza. An Israeli airstrike is reported to have killed dozens of people at the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. Hamas says it will free some foreigners held captive in the coming days without providing specifics. On Tuesday, President Yoon delivered his 2024 budget speech, where he once again underlined fiscal soundness and sought support for next year's budget proposal at the parliament. South Korean defender Min-jae has picked up the AFC Asian International Player of the Year award for 2022. Kim is only the second South Korean player to claim the award after Son Heung-min. Israel conducted an airstrike at a refugee camp in Gaza, killing dozens of Palestinian civilians. In the meantime, though, Hamas says it will release some foreign hostages in the coming days. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
An Israeli strike on a refugee camp in Jabalia in Gaza on Tuesday has killed dozens and injured hundreds more. The Israeli military says the airstrike was part of a successful operation to kill Hamas's top commander, Ibrahim Biari. However, the militant group denied that one of its leaders was at the camp and has instead accused Israel of a heinous crime against safe civilians, children, and women. Initial reports from Gaza's health ministry says at least 50 people were killed in the strike. Meanwhile, according to the General Authority for Crossings and Borders in Gaza, Egypt is set to receive 81 Gazans who have been severely wounded via the Rafah border crossing. According to the AFP, citing an Egyptian medical official, medical teams in Egypt will be at the Rafah crossing to examine the cases coming from Gaza and determine the hospitals they will be sent to. Gaza's health ministry says more than 8,500 Palestinians have been killed since the armed conflict began on October 7th. Hamas says it will release some foreign hostages in the coming days, but did not elaborate further. A spokesman for Hamas's armed wing, Qassam Brigades, said Tuesday that they have informed intermediaries that they will be releasing the foreign hostages soon. More than 230 people, including Israeli soldiers, civilians, and foreigners from several countries, are being held by the militant group. And amid the fierce attacks by Israel, the spokesperson also warned that Hamas would turn Gaza into a graveyard and a quagmire for Israeli forces. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping are looking forward to having constructive conversations during their upcoming summit in San Francisco. Now, this is according to the White House on Tuesday, which announced that the meeting will take place on the sidelines of the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, summit this November. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre added that Biden is expected to have tough conversations, though no details were mentioned about the possible agenda. The meeting comes after China's top diplomat Wang Yi's recent visit to Washington in a series of exchanges between high-ranking officials as the two sides aim to keep open communication channels. South Korea and the U.S. are among 40 countries planning to sign a pledge never to pay ransoms to cybercriminals. Now, the decision comes as the UN says North Korea is illegally using money acquired from a cybercrime to fund its weapons programs. Our Kim Jung-sil reports.
40 countries, including South Korea and the U.S., plan to sign a pledge never to pay ransoms to cybercriminals. They're part of a U.S.-led alliance that will also work toward eliminating the hackers' funding mechanisms. The White House announced a plan on Tuesday local time. The International Counter-Ransomware Initiative, a two-day event ending on November 1st, includes representatives from 48 countries, the EU, and Interpol. This is the third annual event that is being hosted by the U.S., which, according to the White House, is the country that has been hit hardest by cybercrime. It aims to eradicate the criminals' funding by sharing information, including the ransom payment accounts. The initiative comes as FBI Director Christopher Wray emphasized the risks of cyber attacks at Tuesday's U.S. Senate Committee on Homeland Security and Government Affairs. Wray said in the last few years, countries like China, North Korea, and Russia, quote, use cyber operations to target U.S. research. He also said cyber attacks by China, Russia, and Iran are becoming more aggressive and more capable than ever before. The FBI director said he's most worried that these adversaries focus on, quote, compromising U.S. critical infrastructure, especially during a crisis. In ransomware attacks, hackers hack into an organization's systems to steal information or encrypt data and demand ransom in exchange for unlocking it. 김정실, Arirang News.
Since taking office last year, President Yoon has declared he'll make Korea a global pivotal state and has engaged in summits with scores of countries to make that happen. In that process, South Korea is becoming a key force for cooperation across the world, according to a renowned scholar of international relations. Our Oh Soo-young sat down with him.
South Korea has grown as an important Indo-Pacific partner for European countries and a force for multilateral cooperation amid war and tensions across the world. That's according to Ramon Pacheco Pardo, a professor of King's College London who recently co-authored Korea, A New History of South and North. Speaking to Arirang News, Pacheco Pardo said the perception of South Korea has changed over the past year and a half, particularly among European governments, which are increasing their engagement in the Indo-Pacific to secure peace and development, where 60% of the world's maritime trade passes through. He said Seoul's surge of soft and material power in recent years has shown its growing capacity to contribute to resolving global challenges, looking beyond its own security interests on the Korean peninsula.
It's not only the demand for Korea to do more, but they believe that Korea has the economic resources, technological resources, diplomatic resources, and military resources, along with its soft power, to contribute more, to contribute to the provision of global goods, aid, for example, to developing countries. You also see, for example, when it comes to supply chains, diversification, or de-risking, as some people call it, away from China. Well,
the expert noted that Seoul was invited to the G7 and NATO summits for 2 straight years since 2023, with President Yoon pushing to bolster global solidarity and institutions to deter threats from North Korea, ensure peace and the rule of law in regional waters, stabilize supply chains, and support the green transition and global development. In particular, Seoul's trilateral cooperation with Washington and Tokyo, set out at the Camp David summit in August, is expected to become the driving force for building peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific.
I think it is necessary for Korea, Japan, and the US to make sure that they start implementing at least some of the deliverables from the Camp David statement as soon as possible, whether it's a dialogue, education program, whether it is the joint development of deterrence capabilities that they were talking about, for example, in the area of economic security.
But beyond trilateral efforts, multilateralism is crucial to keeping the momentum going, beyond political forces of change that may come as a result of key elections next year, particularly the US presidential race. Here, Pacheco Pardo said Seoul can play a crucial role in solidifying the network of like-minded partners, especially in maritime cooperation and high-tech areas like semiconductors, artificial intelligence, cybersecurity and space.
In terms of making this a success, I think it is necessary also to engage other partners. Of course, Korea, Japan and the US can do a lot together, but many of the areas they focus on, for example, economic security, for example, they do focus on the development of new technologies. You really need other partners. You need Europe, you need Canada, you need Australia, you need Taiwan as well.
Having held 142 summits with 93 countries so far, Yoon is set to engage with a number of European countries until the year end, in bilateral summits with the leaders of Ireland, the UK and the Netherlands. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
South Korea is grappling with the spread of lumpy skin disease, now confirming the total number of farms with infections at 69. How serious is a viral disease that affects cattle? We turn to Professor Michael Ward this morning. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Professor Ward, for our viewers who may not be so familiar with this particular disease, lumpy skin disease, please do walk us through what it is and why it's so detrimental for cattle.
Okay, so lumpy skin disease is caused by a virus. It's a pox virus, so there's a lot of pox viruses in nature. There's smallpox, chickenpox, monkeypox. This particular pox virus just affects cattle and buffalo. And as you can see there in that picture, it causes these lesions on the skin, these nodules that then can turn into sort of sores. It causes fever. Importantly, it stops cattle from eating. So they stop eating and they lose production. So they might stop milk production, they lose weight. So it's a very important economic disease. When it occurs, it affects a lot of cattle, but very few die. So it doesn't really cause a lot of mortality. Traditionally, it's been transmitted by blood-sucking or biting insects, so like mosquitoes and flies. But more recently, we've seen it being transmitted by close contact between cattle.
Sure. So it's a type of a pox that is targeting cattle. Now, this is the first time such a disease has been confirmed here in the country. Where did it come from? As far as I know, it's originated in Africa, but this is the first time we're seeing this here in the country.
Yeah, it's very interesting, the spread of this disease. As you said, it's essentially an African disease. During the last century, it was really confined to Africa. Then we saw some incursions. We saw the disease moving. We saw incursions into Europe, into Eastern Europe, the Balkans, Russia. In 2018, there were major outbreaks in South Asia, so particularly in India, Bangladesh, Nepal. And then in 2019 to 2020, we saw it spreading throughout Southeast Asia. So it's one of these diseases, these transboundary diseases, that has, for some reason, been moving very quickly in the last few years. We're not exactly sure why. It's probably got something to do with trade and the movement of cattle.
Sure. Now, what South Korea's agriculture ministry is saying that there is a high risk of the disease spreading further if selective culling is carried out without inoculation. Professor Ward, is that so? What's the best way to tame the spread then?
Yeah, it's a difficult disease to control. And like all these sort of diseases, it's very important to remove the infectious components. So these are animals that are actively infected. So the idea is to remove those by culling, limited culling in this case. But the main control response is vaccination. So there are vaccines, and as I understand, the South Korean government is trying very hard to very quickly vaccinate all cattle. So that will effectively stop the outbreak, but it does take weeks for that to have an effect. And you need to get that vaccine out fairly quickly. So that's a big logistical problem, trying to vaccinate all animals very quickly. But that's the principal response, is vaccination at this stage.
Right, that's the ultimate solution, because I do know that it takes at least 3 weeks to make that vaccine effective. And South Korea is trying to finish the vaccination program by November 10th. Now, some animal protection organizations here in South Korea are arguing that those cattle infected with the disease should be quarantined and treated rather than culled. Now, is that really a better idea? What do you think?
Certainly quarantine will help a lot, and there needs to be strict quarantine. But the problem with this disease is you have vectors, so insect vectors involved, so mosquitoes and biting flies. Even with quarantine, that disease spread pathway is very difficult to control. So that's why that probably isn't as effective as some other diseases. So very much the very rapid vaccination, removing actively infected herds, and then general biosecurity, so keeping restrictions on who enters, who exits these infected areas. That's very important.
Right. South Korean authorities are really paying close attention to this particular disease because, like I mentioned, it is the first time we are seeing this disease spreading throughout the nation. Then, Lastly, is there any way we can prevent the emergence of such a disease like LSD in the first place, though?
Yeah, very difficult, particularly with the involvement of insects. So, how do you stop the movement of insects? You can certainly control the movement of animals, so your borders and the importation of animals. Also, various products or materials that can be contaminated by this pox virus. So very strict sort of quarantine is the way to control the movement of this disease, and that's being attempted throughout Asia, really, where we've seen this disease just explode. It spread very quickly, very rapidly. So really biosecurity, border protection, and also surveillance, so that when you see the disease, you can control it very quickly. So that would be the key elements, trying to stop the spread of this disease throughout Asia, and particularly in South Korea.
Definitely, and with the vaccination, hopefully it will tame the spread here in South Korea before it gets spread any further. All right, Professor Ward, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
President Yoon has explained and sought support for the government's budget proposal for next year. He said the focus is on improving the country's fiscal soundness so that no burdensome debt passes on to future generations. Our top office correspondent Kim Do-yeon has the details.
Fiscal soundness is the basis for the government's budget proposal for the year 2024, according to President Yoon on Tuesday at the National Assembly as he addressed the parliament.
건전 재정은 단순히 지출을 줄이는 것만이 아니고 국민의 혈세를 낭비 없이 적재적소에 효율적으로 쓰는 것입니다. 건전 재정은 대내적으로는 물가 안정에, 대외적으로는 국가 신인도를 유지하는 데 매우 중요할 뿐 아니라 미래 세대에게 감당하기 어려운 빚을 넘겨주지 않기 위한 것입니다.
In fact, the whole budget, which stands at 657 trillion won or $487 billion US, increased by 2.8% on year. That's the lowest increase since 2005. And Yoon explained the funds saved will be redirected to enhance the nation's core functions such as defense, rule of law, education, health, support for the vulnerable, and securing future growth engines. To be specific, $1.1 billion US additionally allocated for basic living recipients with support for one-parent homes and multicultural children. He also took the opportunity to share his general agenda, saying all policies will prioritize stabilizing prices and improving people's livelihoods amid global uncertainties from conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine. The word economy was mentioned 23 times in his 25-minute speech. The word reform also came up 14 times as he urged support for his 3 key reformation targets to the majority opposition floor, saying they're for the future of the country, including the critically low birth rate.
저출산이라는 어둠의 터널에서 빠져나오려면 미래 세대에게 희망을 주고 우리 사회의 지속 가능한 성장을 가능케 하는 경제 사회 전반의 구조 개혁이 필요합니다. 이러한 연금 개혁, 노동 개혁, 교육 개혁을 위해 의원님들의 깊은 관심과 지원을 부탁드리겠습니다.
Leading up to the speech, much attention was paid to Yoon's scheduled meeting with main opposition Democratic Party's dignitaries and Chairman Lee Jae-myung. A different scene compared to last year's budget speech when all 169 DP lawmakers boycotted it and no such meetings were held.
Since I became the Speaker of the National Assembly, I believe this is the first time that the President, chairpersons from both ruling and opposition parties, and the floor leaders, as well as leaders of all branches of the government, have gathered in one place. That's why it seems many media outlets and citizens are paying close attention to our meeting today.
Following the speech, Yoon also had a meeting and luncheon with committee chairs. There, he promised to reflect the words of lawmakers as he carries out policies. 김도현, Arirang News.
South Korean defender Min-jae was named AFC Asian International Player of the Year 2022 on Tuesday. At the ceremony in Doha, the Asian Football Confederation noted his contribution to the Italian side Napoli last season with 16 clean sheets, 2 goals and 2 assists in 33 matches, as the Blues won their first league title in 33 years. He was also part of the Napoli team that secured its best ever Champions League finish, reaching the quarterfinals. Currently at German side Bayern Munich, Kim becomes just the second South Korean player after Son Heung-min to win the award. He was also the only Asian player to make the 2023 Men's Ballon d'Or award shortlist.
Good morning, I'm Kim Seong. We now turn over to stories from around the world. We begin in the Middle East, where Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen issued a video statement on Tuesday claiming ballistic missiles and armed drone attacks against Israel. Houthi military spokesperson Brigadier Yahya Sari said it was the third such operation since the October 7th Hamas attack and that they plan to carry out more strikes until the Israeli aggression stops. Israeli military officials on the same day said the newly operational Arrow missile defense system had shot down a surface-to-surface missile they believed to have been launched by Houthis aimed at the port city of Eilat. They also said fighter jets had successfully intercepted drones, with the Times of Israel reporting that no intrusion into Israeli territory was detected. 25 days into the Israeli-Hamas war, concerns are high over the regional conflict amid speculation that Iran could become more actively involved. Now, moving over to Europe, where the heiress to the Spanish throne, one of the last remaining monarchies in Europe, has turned 18. On her 18th birthday on Tuesday, Spanish Crown Princess Leonor de Borbon-Ortiz swore allegiance to her country's constitution, laying the foundation for her eventual succession as the Queen of Spain. During the televised ceremony in the lower house of Parliament, Leonor recited the same oath that her father, King Felipe VI, did when he turned 18 in 1986, pledging to faithfully carry out her duties and to keep and uphold the Constitution and the laws and respect the rights of citizens. Should Princess Leonor become the next queen, she'll be Spain's first queen since Queen Isabella II, who reigned from 1833 to 1868. Moving over to the US, where a 58-year-old Maryland man who became the second person in the world to receive a transplanted heart from a pig has died. Lawrence Fassett, who was dying from a heart failure and ineligible for a conventional heart transplant, received a genetically modified pig heart transplant surgery on September 20th. He survived for nearly 6 weeks after the highly experimental surgery, just short of the 2 months that the world's first pig heart transplant patient David Bennett lived following the surgery the year before. Fassett's cause of death was due to the body's rejection of the organ, while the previous patient, Bennett, passed away from a pig virus found inside the organ. Saudi Arabia is to host the Men's 2034 World Cup after being named as the only bidder for the competition. According to FIFA President Gianni Infantino on Tuesday, Saudi Arabia was the only interested party after Australia pulled out ahead of the FIFA deadline on the same day. Football Australia said it would be now focused on preparing to hold the Women's Asian Cup in 2026 and the Club World Cup in 2029. The US, Mexico and Canada will host the World Cup in 2026, while Morocco, Portugal and Spain remain the single bid for the 2030 edition. A FIFA Congress in late 2024 will confirm the hosting duties for the 2030 and 2034 World Cups.
Good morning. We're entering into November, but the temperature feels like it's going backwards. Morning temperatures are nearly 11 degrees Celsius higher than seasonal norms, and highs will also soar to 23 degrees this afternoon. And it's going to be even warmer tomorrow with an expected high of 25 degrees Celsius here in the capital. Perhaps shirts and shorts will be just fine. Northern parts of the country, however, will see some spotty showers through tonight with 5 to 30 millimeters of rainfall expected, along with thunder and lightning. Air quality could become bad in some of the western regions, including here in Seoul. Meanwhile, southern parts of the country are in for very promising weather under plenty of sunshine and the warmth. Mother Nature will give us extra warmth for the next couple of days, and then rain this weekend will bring a late autumn chill to the country next week. That's Korea for you, and here's a look at the international weather conditions.
We thank you for watching New Day at Arirang. We'll be back tomorrow for Thursday's edition at the same time, 9 a.m. Korea time.
해외에서 경기가 있을 때마다 스스로 다짐하는 말이 있어요. 나는 대한민국을 대표하는 선수이기 전에 대한민국 국민이다. 해외에서 자부심을 갖는 가장 좋은 방법은 재외 선거를 놓치지 않는 거죠. 인터넷으로 쉽고 간편하게 신고 신청할 수 있는 제22대 국회의원 재외 선거. 소중한 한 표를 위해 신고 신청하는 당신이 대한민국의 자부심입니다. 중앙선거관리위원회.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's mine? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world, like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city, transforming our world, navigating toward a better future.
The whole movie is basically just concentrated on real human emotions, not just love, not just friendship, but like everything.
Even for relationships that aren't focused romantically, I think it's very normal to have these type of ups and downs.
Lotte takes a new leap beyond its boundaries. Our change will lead to better lives for all. New Lotte, the power of a better world. New today, better tomorrow. Lotte.
Welcome. (24시간) 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's loyal? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
We're here to make a new type of news. New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation. Making news just for you. It's November 1st here in Seoul. I'm Yoon, and you're watching News Generation. Joining me in the studio is Cheska Dainhong.
Happy November, everyone.
Happy November. We made it.
We made it.
We made it. And Mal Song. Hi, everyone. All right, now both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. As usual, let's start with our news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending on social media over the past 24 hours. Now, have you ever heard of 제사? It's when family members gather together to commemorate and grieve their deceased ancestors, mainly by preparing their favorite dishes. Though 제사 is a big part of our Confucian-rooted traditions, it takes a lot of time and effort. Recently, a survey of 1,500 adults found that a majority of Koreans are considering skipping 제사 as a whole or finding other convenient ways to commemorate their relatives' death anniversaries. To be exact, 6 out of 10 said they no longer are planning on doing these memorial services. Moving on, K-pop has garnered massive popularity globally. Some experts believe that that's why we're seeing more of the genre songs include English lyrics. One expert specifically analyzed all the K-pop songs that made it to the digital top 400 chart in the beginning half of this year. The latest songs had 18.9 percentage points more English lyrics than in the year 2018. And recently on NewsGen, we introduced one of the hottest domestic headlines that has to do with the romance scam between Olympic fencing medalist Nam Hyun-hee and her former fiancé Chun Chong-jo, who turned out to be lying about her biological gender and personal background. Now, this incident has concentrated a lot more attention to what we should look out for when it comes to romance scams and how common they are. According to the National Intelligence Service, there were 281 romance scam incidents recorded from the years 2018 to 2022, and the amount of money involved in these cases surpassed $67 million. We also have seen this figure rise year by year, and criminology experts warn the public to be especially vigilant against scammers who flaunt their wealth or personal life on social media. They also pointed to how many of these fraudsters are using romance or love to gain one's trust and then exploit it. They also mentioned how easier it becomes for these fraudsters to get a hold of a situation or gaslight victims to the extent of believing something completely off the grid when it comes to common sense, like we've seen in the case of Nam Hyun-hee, who claimed she was so mentally manipulated by her ex-fiancé that she thought she had become pregnant from someone who's actually biologically female. So here in the studio, what do you think about the rise of romance scam figures, and what do you think needs to be done to further prevent this from ever happening again?
I mean,
let's first of all say that I do have empathy for most people who go through scams, but in this specific case, I don't know how better to have been prepared for this. And we know that she is a woman in her 40s. She has been married. So at this point, I think all we can say is that she was just emotionally very vulnerable. And all that to say, I think maybe we should offer more courses. I know it sounds kind of weird to say we should offer courses, but to have more knowledge when it comes to manipulation, when it comes to gaslighting, when it comes to personality disorders, more psychology background when it comes to, you know, scams and things like that. So maybe having that in our mandatory education might help.
That's a very good idea, because after I've read into this article quite a few times, and a lot of psychology experts are saying that's why gaslighting is so scary. You never really know how to look out for it. You need to know the red flags in advance. So maybe if we include that in our actual education curriculum, that can make us better aware. Where do you stand on this issue, Jessica?
I definitely agree with Niall on the need for the education, because there's a very famous saying in the psychological field that the people who get therapy are never the assailants. It's always the victims who get the therapy, even though it's the assailant who needs to get the therapy to fix their behaviors or fix their traumas before they inflict pain on others. So one of the things that I think happened when it comes to romance scam, and the reason, as criminology experts say, it's actually one of the oldest criminal sort of fraud cases, you know, using love and emotions in both genders. So I think one of the reasons that is rising and it's becoming, you know, more manipulative is because love is such a tricky emotion. I think a lot of the things that these people do is they completely shut out any room for questioning. Because once you question the legitimacy or the background of your partner, the partner goes on to say, you cannot do that. You shouldn't do that if you love me. You must not love me. And usually the victims also have their own trauma and fear. So they're afraid that if they start questioning, the lover might leave them. You know, the security and the safety that they got. So I think that also happened with Nam Hyun-hee's case. She mentioned in her interview that she was sort of afraid to question in case, you know, the love might be questioned. So I definitely think that's one of the manipulative reasons that a lot of people fall into it.
I completely agree, and we talked about this amongst ourselves before we went on air. I think love makes you blind, and also when you're a victim of gaslighting, you don't even realize
You don't know.
That's why it's so scary. Now, that was our news feed for this Wednesday. Let's now switch gears to our main discussion topic of the day. Over the past 2.5 years, we've seen a popular trend among millennials and Gen Z, and that's becoming an organ donor. My AI voice secretary explains in detail.
Jung Hee-soo died in August, but she saved 6 other people, all thanks to donating her organs. Only being 23 years old, Jung had dreamed of becoming a baker, but one day she fainted in her house and never came out of a coma. Her parents remember her as a bright, bubbly daughter who would have wanted to help as many people as she could if she had lived longer. That's why they have decided to donate her heart, lungs, liver and kidney. There's many aspiring Gen Z donors like Jung these days. According to one of the biggest organ donation organizations in the country, nearly 3 out of 10 organ donor applicants over the past 2 years were in their 20s. Next in line were those in their 40s, then those in their 30s.
Nowadays, we're seeing a lot of young donors these days like Hee-soo, especially compared to our parents' or grandparents' generation. And here in the studio, Cheska, what do you think some of the reasons are for that?
I think there's both a social and cultural factor. To start with, I think our generation has definitely experienced some unforeseen and unexpected tragedies that sort of hit the younger generation. I'm talking about the Sewol-ho incident, and of course we just commemorated the 1st year anniversary, but the Itaewon Stampede. And I think what we experience from these tragedies is that death is omnipresent, as unfortunate as it is, and that it can happen to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And I think that sort of revelation and realization sort of made us aware that maybe it's better to prepare in advance for something that might happen. I think another thing is definitely cultural. So our generation is rightfully classified as, quote, radically socially active. So one of the things that our generation's key trait is we really care about the world, the environment, you know, the human rights. So I think in that lieu of the things, I think our generation definitely is very keen to sort of, I guess, donate and support other people. Yeah.
Well, are there any other reasons you think? Yeah, I mean, watching it on TV, reading about it, growing up, like, you know, people like Hisu, there have been people who have saved other people's lives, and it's kind of considered noble, right? And I think that media exposure definitely helped. But some are saying it was since COVID that actually made it a little more popular as the application process became a little more accessible as it became accessible online. Before, a lot of the religious organizations or hospitals would take in the applications, but nowadays you can go online and fill out a form and send it in. And I think with our generation, being easy to access online is a key thing.
I think accessibility really helps people in actually making this difficult decision. Also, as we mentioned in our previous episodes, I also think it has to do with our generation being quite fixated on the concept of well dying. So I think this is one step they might want to take in order to achieve that, well dying. Now, are there any stats or figures to back the statement up that you guys just made here that shows that youth are actually signing up or becoming organ donors to the point that it seems to be a growing trend among millennials and Gen Z?
Yeah, and I was very, very surprised when I found this out, and it's definitely reflected in the recent statistics, and I'm very actually excited to show you this. So let's take a look at the screen. So for the past 2 years, there have been around 200,000 new organ donor registers. Now, of those people, check this out, almost half was made up of 20s and 30s. And now even within that group, if we split the 20s and 30s, the 20s were the highest among all age groups. I'm talking about all the way up to the 50s and others. The 20s were highest at 28%. Now, and you can see the stats already compared to other age groups, but this was actually super interesting for me because, I mean, think about this. The 20s are the youngest age group, and they're already thinking about donating the organ and death. So I was expecting the ratio to actually level pretty equally throughout all age group, but surprisingly that wasn't the case. So this is a very clear, distinctive trait of our generation.
For sure. Now, what about you guys? You guys are speaking on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. So I would like to ask, are you ever considering becoming an organ donor one day?
So I actually already am.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Yeah, I'm an organ donor. Not yet. I am pledged to be an organ donor.
In
the future.
You still have your organs, right?
Yeah, I have my organs in here. It's all healthy. But what happened was that on my college campus, there was a campaign for it, and I didn't really think twice about it. It was a very natural thought to me. I figured just logically, if I'm gonna die, might as well help other people. And I know it's kind of a traditional way to think, to not hurt your body or harm your body even after you die here in Korea. But actually my grandmother also donated her body to science. She donated her body after she died to Chosun University for anatomy classes. And that happened at a quite young age for me. So I think it came really naturally. And I also have family members who have benefited from organ donors, who's gotten liver transplants and saved their lives. So it's all in a very positive light. And I must say, it is a little bit shocking for those who are remaining, the family members at the funerals, because they take the body away from the funeral home straight to the hospital. And so you don't really get that kind of closure of the burial. But it's doing incredible things.
I think that's a great point you mentioned. A lot of people are conflicted as to whether they want to be an organ donor one day, especially family relatives, given that the way, and you know, if you're in the ER, it's really busy, though you try to be very careful with the body, still you have to be saving another life. That's why people are worried about...
Time is really of essence when it comes to organ donation.
Exactly. That's why I think a lot of people are conflicted. But as you mentioned, Niall, once you witness how many lives it can save, I think it does play a very respectable part. Where do you stand on this issue?
I mean, Niall mentioned something very interesting. I think family experience is very important, and I can speak for... Mine isn't as peachy and beautiful as yours, but I also have a family member who did sort of, I would say, forced, but gracefully forced me into it. So I didn't apply it in Korea.
Okay.
But when I was applying for my driver's license in the States, I vaguely remember, I think there was a checkbox of whether you wanted to organ donate. And my younger sister, who is practicing to be a surgeon, was right there with me. And she grilled me, really grilled me on the importance of organ donation and dedicating my body to science. Hear this, for people like her. So she was right there, so I had to check the box. But it wasn't anything emotional and nice. It was more like, you have to because I need to practice on cadavers like yours.
So it didn't come out from like your own choice, basically. You helped your sister out.
I did.
Yeah, put it at that.
And many medical students out there who would like to practice on my cadavers. Yeah.
Which is quite essential. No, it's a tricky question, I think, for sure. Now, I would now like to ask you now, as an organ donor, can you tell us the application process like here in Korea?
Right. So there's this site in Korean. It's 사랑의 장기 기증 운동본부. So this is for the donors. In Korean, the website is donor.or.kr. You can go online and they have an application ready. You can print it out, fill it out, and you have to send it in via mail. But if you're under the age of 16, you do need consent from your legal guardians, and they'll send you back a little card that says you're an organ donor with a sticker that you can put on your license. I actually have a driver's license with it kind of looks like a little cherry, but it also has, it's basically signifying that you are an organ donor.
And it's really nice to hear that it's so accessible because you can do it online, so make sure to check it out if you're interested. Now, we asked our viewers the same question, if they've signed a contract or consider becoming an organ donor one day. Here's what 3 of them had to share with us. Take a look at the screen to find out. Let's start with Kite. Kite said, after I pass away, my organs will be of no use to me. I was 15 when I decided I would have them harvested and transplanted to someone in need. Benio said, donating organs isn't an issue. It's the hospital getting it from the donor for free and selling it to the person who needs the transplant for a high price. Tasmia sent, I want to be a donor, but I can't due to my health conditions and my past medical reports. Now, these are all valid points and insights from our viewers. And now we're going to include another global millennial in our talks who's quite enthusiastic about the concept of organ donation. We'll talk to her right after this. We're now going to include a fellow millennial who's actually considering becoming an organ donor one day. She's Jade Zina Humawas, currently living in the Philippines. Welcome back, Jade.
Hello everyone.
Hello.
It's nice to be back.
Yes, great to have you back. Now, Jade, today we're going to be talking about organ donation, and I hear you want to become an organ donor one day. Why so?
Oh, yes. I chose to become an organ donor because I want to offer someone the opportunity to live when I'm no longer here and when my organs is still intact. And yeah, I think it feels the right thing to do is to help those who are truly need my organs as well.
Okay.
So in the studio, we talked about the application process of Korea. Now we're curious, in the Philippines, how does the application process work? And what are there laws regarding organ donations as well?
Oh, in the Philippines, the process for organ donation involves using the online registration system provided by the Philippine Network for Organ Sharing, which operates under the Department of Health. So this process requires obtaining a lifeline organ donor card and filling out your personal information, including a contact person, maybe a family member or a close friend, a photo, and of course your signature. You also need to specify the organ and tissues you wish to donate. Regarding the legal framework, there is a law called Republic Act number 7170, known as the Organ Donation Act of 1991, permits individuals to donate their entire body or specific body parts through a will or testament. If the deceased person intentions are not stated, their family members can authorize organ donation. So these donations are considered valid for therapeutic, research, or medical education purposes. So international organ sharing is also allowed, but requires approval from the Department of Health.
I see. I'd like to ask you the next question. Are there a lot of millennials and Gen Z in the Philippines who are interested in becoming an organ donor like yourself, and why or why not?
Yes, of course. Recently, Filipino millennials and Gen Zs have become more interested in organ donation as they become better informed about it. According to the latest data from the Department of Health, there has been a significant increase in organ donations from deceased donors. In 2022, there were 40 organs transplanted from deceased donors, up from only 6 in 2021. Furthermore, there were 20 organ donations from deceased donors in 2022, a significant increase from only 3 donors in 2021. And the data also shows an uptick in cornea transplants, with 209 performed in 2022 compared to 128 the previous year.
Now, I agree that it is a global trend that we're seeing a lot of people from our generation considering donating their organs, just like yourself, to even after the death, to help other people. And I understand it's quite important, but I also think what needs to match up to that demand is the infrastructure. A lot of people are still worried whether this will be done in a safe and ethical way. What are your thoughts on that? And regardless, why do you think organ donation is still very important?
I think organ donation is still important because there are a lot of recipients who are waiting for organ donors, rather than having the amount of organ donors that we have right now. So the queue with the recipients, the transplant recipients, is way too many rather compared to the organ donors that we have recently.
I see, but I hope to see a lot of medical infrastructure catch up to the demand, and I think that's another issue that we'll be talking about. But in the meantime, thank you so much for sharing your insight with us today, Jade. Thank you.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
I would actually like to expound on that part. I think organ donation is the right way to go, given that we are in health crises. We're seeing it every day. There's lives to save. But what do you guys think needs to be done to better make sure and encourage people to actually do this? And why do you think it's such an important topic amongst our generation?
I think that's a great question. And these were the facts that kind of shocked me when I heard it. So 8 lives, 8 people could be saved with 1 person donation.
Wow.
And 75 people can be saved from tissue donation.
Wow.
And this is just an approximate, maybe more, maybe less. But, you know, just in our lives, when we're living, we can't possibly save 1 person. But the fact that when our lives are over, and just by simply donating the body parts that we don't need anymore, that we can save this many people, I think is something very empowering, to be honest. And as in the interview he mentioned, right now we have health crisis, and unfortunately, it's the human organs that can be transplanted to human to have a viable option for living. So I think it's all about humanity and about empathy. Like, what can we do after death?
And if I may add on, I just hope it's done in an ethical way.
I hope so too. Oh, definitely, yes.
For sure, because I think as noble as it is to decide to become an organ donor, I think it's as respectable and needed to treat them in a respectable way, even though it's cadaver.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this kind of goes into a little bit of a philosophical field on what is the meaning of life.
Or death.
And death. And I think for me, it's really more than just me. Life is bigger than just me. And if I can impact other people in any way while I'm living, that would be, I guess that would bring my life more meaning. And in death, if I can save other people, like Jessica mentioned, whether 8 or 75 or all of them combined.
Yes.
Or, I mean, if I'm not taking really good care of my organs, not that many people. So we should be in good shape. I really feel like that would be the definition of well dying. We mentioned on the show well dying and dying with meaning. And I feel like that would really, truly be a meaningful
And
death.
it's really nice to hear that you're willing to be a superhero when you're living and even after death.
Oh, that's a beautiful saying. If you want to be a superhero, do your organ donation.
Exactly, superhero while you're living and after. Now, in the meantime, we'll be here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks to Cheska Dainong.
Pleasure's always mine, thank you.
And now Song.
No problem.
All right, and thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.
Welcome